All right. Two great panels so far, one more to go on embodied carbon. But before we get to that panel, I want to do a quick introduction. We're pleased to have a really, really strong partnership with the U.S. Green Building Council, particularly in the last 2 years, who they've really stepped up to support our work, and we're really, really appreciative of that, to Peter and to Rhiannon. USGBC is launching LEED V5, and we've done an event on it already a couple weeks ago, and I'm really excited to see a dedicated pillar to decarbonization, which includes an embodied carbon component, which of course is the subject of our next panel. But before we get to that, please welcome Rhiannon Jacobson from the USGBC for a quick update.
Great, good afternoon. I am standing between you and a fantastic panel, so I will try and be brief. Thank you, John, for the warm welcome. USGBC really appreciates the partnership with Urban Green Council. I don't think that it's any secret to anyone in the room that New York City is leading the way to a more sustainable and equitable future because of change makers like all of yourselves that are in the room today. Your presence today is a testament to your commitment to transforming how buildings and communities are designed, built, and operated. I want to recognize our partners at Urban Green Council. John and his team do incredible work and are a big reason why New York continues to lead the way for cities here and around the world on decarbonization. I also want to take a moment to thank all of our USGBC members and volunteers that are in the room. It goes without saying, we can't do all of the work that we do without your support and commitment to the mission. I have the privilege to spend my day job in communities all around the country, meeting with stakeholders, attending engagements, listening and strategizing around leadership activities and opportunities. 2024 has been an exceptional year, as I've had the opportunity to share exciting improvements and actions at USGBC, such as LEED version 5, which you'll hear a little bit more about. After 18 plus years with the council, I can attest that this is one of the most vibrant, dynamic, thriving, and leadership-focused filled periods I've ever experienced. We began the year with the release of our 3-year strategic plan to address critical challenges and plan strategies to successfully evolve our programs. Building on the incredible legacy of the past 30 years, the plan positions USGBC to evolve past or beyond past successes and redefine leadership within our industry and address challenges and opportunities to come. The plan includes critical approaches that will help us meet our climate goals, such as rapid decarbonization, centering our work in resilience, human health, and social equity, and connecting USGBC programs to critical market drivers. Meanwhile, the newest version of LEED, and you will hear about this several times, LEED version 5 implements these strategies. When LEED launched more than 20 years ago, it defined sustainability leadership for an entire generation of professionals and projects and helped permanently transform industry practice. We know our buildings can bring about solutions for climate change. We're hearing about a lot of them today. Biodiversity loss, quality of life, and so much more when they are designed, built, and operated with intent. Created around 3 impact areas, every credit and prerequisite in LEED version 5 focuses on decarbonization, quality of life, and ecological conservation. LEED delivers sustainable, efficient, and resilient built environments that promote environmental responsibility, economic viability, and social equity. In April, we released drafts of LEED version 5 for public comment, and the response has been tremendous. We received thousands of comments from members, LEED users, and stakeholders from all around the globe who are truly invested in green buildings and the work that we do. We can't wait to share and launch the final rating system in early 2025. LEED version 5 is only one of the programs that we are working on to address the imperatives at hand. We're continuing to invest in ARC, our building performance management platform that helps put buildings onto a pathway of leadership. we're developing a new offering to measure, track, and verify the performance of entire portfolios of buildings to help stakeholders simplify their financial and regulatory sustainability reporting. And later this year, we will begin implementing a modern all-digital platform that will greatly improve the user experience for LEED and all of our offerings. Finally, over the last year, USGBC has produced some insight reports on topics that are important to the market. Research is a critical tool that provides important perspectives on the industry. One report that I want to highlight today and really recommend you taking a read if you haven't already is on a topic that is near and dear to this group: the state of decarbonization, the progress in US commercial buildings in 2023. Policymakers are rapidly expanding their role in building decarbonization. Climate risk reporting requirements are advancing in every region of the globe. More than 40 US states and local governments have committed to adopt building performance standards to monitor and reduce operational emissions from existing buildings. And we're beginning to see embodied carbon provisions in building codes, which we expect will accelerate greatly in the next few years. On the market side, major real estate companies are committing to addressing climate change. According to our recent report, 60% of the nation's largest REITs now have emissions and energy reduction goals, and about a quarter have adopted long-term science-based decarbonization targets. This transformation is plain to see, but in other cases, climate risk is set to reshape our industry in less obvious ways. Climate risk is changing not only how our buildings must be designed and operated, but also how they will be regulated, leased, and financed, which is why USGBC is taking the steps now to help our industry meet these evolving expectations. There is an urgency we must meet, and we look forward to continuing to partnering with the market to achieve our shared goals. And now with that, I'd like to hand it back to Urban Green for what I know is going to be a fantastic panel. Thank you.
Okay, it's time for our third and final panel. Embodied carbon is here to stay, so our panelists can come on up to the stage. Our moderator for this session will be Amanda Kaminsky, who is the Director of Sustainable Construction for the Americas at Lendlease, and she's going to kick us off for this session.
Thanks, Colleen. Hi, everybody. I want to start by reiterating the stat that Elijah referenced earlier, that buildings are responsible for 70% of annual greenhouse gas emissions in New York City, 70%. A lot of these emissions are from the energy, the Scope 1 fuels, and the Scope 2 electricity expended in operating these buildings, the operational carbon. However, a growing 1/4 of these New York City building emissions are carbon embodied in building materials through their life cycle stages. This embodied carbon, or Scope 3 emissions, is emitted in product extraction and manufacturing, construction and installation, the use stage of a building, end of life, and reuse or recycling. As building energy efficiencies continue to improve, enticed by forces including Local Law 97, some people might use other words besides enticed, operational carbon will represent a decreasing relative proportion of total emissions, and embodied carbon emissions an increasing proportion. Herein lies an opportunity for us all. Given the time-sensitive nature of the climate crisis, we need to reduce carbon now and fast. While operational carbon accumulates over the lifespan of a building, much of the embodied carbon of each project is emitted up front and can be minimized soon via decisions that we are making now. So I'm Amanda Kaminsky, Director of Sustainable Construction for Lendlease America. Here with us, we have an architect and professor, a tool developer and CEO, a science-based standards organization lead, and a policy advisor. No, they didn't walk into a bar, they walked into this conference and onto this stage, which I'm very, very, very grateful for, and you will be too. They have some great insights to share, so let's dig in.
They're sending. Okay.
Oh, no. Hello?
Hello?
Nice.
Hello?
Responsive, yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Great. Great. So I'm going to have each of the panelists introduce themselves. I've asked them to provide what their role is in the context of their company's role, as well as how they are addressing embodied carbon and maybe what you guys have each built or created or authored to facilitate embodied carbon reduction. So why don't I start with Mariane?
Hi there, thanks for having me. I'm Mariane Jang. I'm a senior policy advisor in the Division of Resiliency and Sustainability at the New York State Office of General Services. And I usually ask when I come to these conferences, can you raise your hand if you know what the Office of General Services is or does? Oh, okay, it's not bad. All right. It's usually like one person. So I didn't know either before I started. So I'll just give you a little background. So we're an agency that delivers critical services for New York State, for other agencies, as well as local municipalities. So we offer a range of services. Things that are most relevant here are we manage over $4 billion of design and construction projects for other state agencies across the state. We manage over 150 buildings. That's about 20 million square feet of real estate. Also oversee $330 billion worth of government procurement because we oversee all the contracts. So we do a lot of work, the critical services for the other states, agencies. And I sit in this newly created division of resiliency and sustainability. Was created by our current commissioner, Jeanette Moy, as led by Deputy Commissioner Emily Rubenstein. And the team has been there, well, the division has been there 2 years, but I've been there a year and a half. And we were created really to push the governor's priorities on her climate goals, the state's climate goals in general. She has a lot of aggressive, ambitious goals in that area, and so we're there to help work on those. My role specifically is, part of my work is I lead on the reduction of embodied carbon in construction materials for the state. So we're talking about state operations, the materials that we procure, that we buy, and that we install. And I co-wrote two sets of guidelines, which I'll talk about later. I'll save that for later. Save the best for last. But looking forward to talking with the rest of the panelists today.
Great. Diana?
Yeah, hi, thank you for having me. I'm Diana Farmer. I'm the North American Regional Lead at the Science Based Targets Initiative, for SBTI. Maybe I'll do a crowd poll and ask if who has a validated science-based targets in the audience. Anybody? No one has a validated target. Oh, I see maybe one. Yeah, waving. Maybe that's Abloy. So we are a climate action organization enabling businesses to set targets in line with what science says is needed to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius and to achieve net zero by 2050. So we essentially translate the climate science into target setting methodologies for companies to use to understand how much and how fast to reduce their emissions. For the building sector in particular, we're finalizing guidance for publication that's been developed over the past few years in partnership with CREM and Ramble. The guidance actually establishes 1.5 degree aligned pathways for both in-use buildings emissions and embodied emissions, also providing some guidance on emissions accounting and reporting. In the broader ecosystem, we're aligned with the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, so with organization-wide greenhouse gas accounting, which impacts asset-level decarbonization in more systemic ways than an asset-level certification like LEED. Over 5,000 companies worldwide have validated science-based targets, and renewable energy and energy efficiency are often the low-hanging fruit. So in-use operational emissions are already receiving a lot of attention from companies that have set these targets. But as the low-hanging fruit is exhausted, we do start to shift to things like embodied carbon and embodied emissions, which is why we're here today. So excited to talk about that.
Great. Chris?
Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Erickson. I am the founder and CEO of a company called Climate Earth. And I started the company a long time ago. I think in retrospect, I might have been crazy, but there was a guy in 2008 named Obama that was going to become president, and he was going to put a price on carbon. And all the investment bankers in New York were just going crazy, setting up big teams to measure carbon. And So me being a Silicon Valley guy, I said, well, how do you measure carbon? And I learned about a thing called life cycle assessment. And I looked at that and thought, oh my God, it takes months to get one number, and it costs a lot of money, and it's manual and labor intensive. How are we going to have a sustainable economy? So we started Climate Earth to make that faster, more efficient, automated, and business friendly. So back in 2012, a concrete company came to me and said, Chris, I want to be first in the nation to have an EPD, and I want to have them for all my concrete mixes. And thinking that concrete mix was something you bought at Home Depot in a sack, I said, well, how many mixes do you have? And he said, well, we got about 1,000 per plant, and we're adding 2 or 3 every week. And as a software guy, I thought, that's an interesting problem. And we created the first EPD automation system in 2013. Today, we have 1,200 plants running our software, about 1,000 here in the US, and another 200 or so in Europe and Asia. We automate ready-mix cement, concrete block, and cement in Europe. So we've come a long way, and but we don't do any innovation, right? We just measure. We rely on the architects and the engineers in concrete to make those innovations. And I'm delighted to see that that's happening. I think, I'm going to say one more thing. I think I'm the only California boy here so far. I haven't met anybody else. And I just wanted to say that I'm just delighted to be in front of a group of architects and engineers and policymakers, because climate change is really the defining, and I mean this, the defining megatrend for humanity. And you guys are the people that are going to make a difference, and you're leading here in New York City and New York State. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris. Tess?
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Tess McNamara. I'm a senior consultant at Arup on the climate and sustainability team. If you're not familiar with Arup, we're a global engineering firm, and we work on some of the biggest and most ambitious projects across the globe. Here in our backyard, we worked on Alice Tully Hall at Lincoln Center, the 2nd Avenue subway expansion, and City Island, just to name a few. On the sustainability and embodied carbon side, which is why we're here, besides working on all of those projects to make them as sustainable as possible, we also focused on putting out a number of tools for the industry that I just wanted to mention quickly. The first is the Circular Buildings Toolkit, which is a step-by-step guide for designers to help them decarbonize their projects one step at a time. It's a great tool. I encourage you to check it out. And the second is our platform called Zero, which allows us to collect and analyze whole life carbon footprints for all of our projects. Arup is, a global firm. We have a lot of projects. There's over 1,000 assets on the platform right now. And given, we're going to talk about this, but the need for more data collection for embodied carbon to set baselines and to evaluate trends and to establish policy, it's a really exciting initiative. Outside of Arup, I'm on the faculty at the Yale School of Architecture. I'm also an architect, where I teach a course called Bad Buildings, Decarbonization Through Reuse, Retrofit, and Proposition. I think education is so essential on this topic for the next generation of designers, just to even give them a baseline understanding of the vocabulary, the metrics, the tools that all of us know intimately, but that architects starting out in the profession are less familiar with, so that they can sort of go forth and share knowledge on their projects and influence their work for years to come. So my research and work focuses on the carbon story behind existing buildings, so that reuse and retrofit piece is what I'm really interested in right now. Reuse being the embodied carbon footprint of existing buildings and the benefits of reusing rather than building new. And then that retrofit piece is the operational carbon piece, which we'll touch on a little bit. I recently led a study that looked at the whole life carbon footprint of office to residential conversions and the potential savings that can emerge if that happened at a wider scale in the city, which I know we'll talk about throughout the panel.
Fantastic. Thanks, Tess. So, Mariane, why are the Executive Order 22 embodied carbon guidance and the Buy Clean Concrete guidelines so important for New York State? I know this guidance and guidelines fit into ongoing future momentum for embodied carbon reductions statewide, but maybe if you can talk a little bit about how that's supposed to happen for concrete and for other materials, that would be great.
Yeah, great. So thanks. So yeah, we have at the state level, and we're not obviously the first state. California preceded us, and the federal government's done a lot of work in this area too. But we're the first state to have put out some some low carbon concrete guidelines that apply across all state agencies. So in many other states, there's the state DOT that set guidelines for the concrete they procure for DOT projects, Department of Transport projects, and there's some like for example, the Office of the Architect in the state of Colorado, they have guidelines for their own projects. In New York State, we decided to make it more complicated for ourselves, and so now we have these guidelines that apply they technically apply to 75 affected state entities. So just to start with that, the governor has ambitious goals. So that's one of the first set of that's one of the guidelines we've produced. The other is related to her executive order, Governor Hochul's executive order 22, leading by example. And that's an executive order that also other states have put in similar executive orders that sort of promote sustainable government operations. And there is a sort of a menu of different topics within her executive order, and embodied carbon is one of the big ones. And the executive order, the actual language has set out sort of a rough direction, but a colleague at NYSERDA, Mikhail Haramati, who's now at NRDC, and myself were just tasked with, hey, develop this program. There was not a program on reducing embodied carbon at the state at the time, so it was brand new. We started from scratch. We talked to first a lot of federal and state colleagues who had already done some of this work. We talked to Carbon Leadership Forum, RMI. We learned from industry experts such as many on this stage, Amanda and Chris. We learned from everyone before we decided on our own approach. And we really drew on best practice. Like, what are other states doing? What are other municipalities doing? What's the Canadian government doing? Because they're actually far more advanced than we are too. And we developed this approach that's basically starting with collecting data, because we realized we don't have good data in New York State about our own projects and what we're procuring across state agencies. Every agency has got their own data, but it's not unified, it's not standardized. So we wanted a way to just collect good data on what are we procuring, what is the what are the quantities of those things, which of those products have environmental product declarations, which is the report that Chris, the software, will spit out for you, and and so what is the environmental impact? What is the greenhouse gas impact of those materials? So the other guidance, it's called the EO22 Embodied Carbon Guidance, is really our way of trying to quantify and create a baseline for ourselves on that. And then, once we have collected several years of data, then we'll be in a position to set our own strategies and reduction targets, based on the data that we have. There is a lot of industry average data, I have to say, on different materials, especially concrete, as you would know. That, and so we did rely on that to sort of help inform where we started and, where our guidance landed. But at the end of the day, the industry average data is an average. Also, we sort of looked into it, and the way that it was collected meant that there were certain sectors of the industry that weren't included, and so we really understood that what we need to do is sort of start with our own base data and go from there. But I just wanted to touch a little bit on how we are looking at 4 construction materials, I should say, in our guidance. We look at concrete mixes, asphalt mixes, steel, and glass. And if you go to other embodied carbon conferences, I think you'll hear the same 4 materials sort of repeated pretty frequently. Everyone seems to be aligning on the same 4, which I think is helpful for market alignment and just message to the market. So there's that. The other thing I just wanted to talk really briefly about is how how much of this is happening across the state. So I did mention that there were some first mover states before us in the federal government, but if you go to a great resource called the Carbon Leadership Forum, they have a policy map. If you look on the map, you can see all the different states that have either a regulation, incentive, a program, or training on embodied carbon, and it's really starting to cover most of the country, I would say. So it's definitely not a new topic, it's definitely one that's coming. If you're not already sort of familiar with it. And also the EPA was through the sort of infrastructure, I'm going to get the name wrong, the IRA inflation stimulus money, basically made $250 million available through the EPA to support this work, like basically reducing embodied carbon through better environmental product declaration report creations, supporting like construction materials manufacturers in creating EPDs, and just improving that whole labeling ecosystem, so that if you're a designer or an architect and you want to be able to see transparently the carbon emissions, the carbon footprint from a material that you're choosing, that you can that you'll have a better standardized, more credible sort of process for doing that. It is credible now, but they just want to make it more robust. So I just wanted to point that out because I think it is important to note that, yes, New York State is leading on this, but it's certainly a nationwide issue.
Great. Thanks, Mariane. Kind of staying at the product level, maybe I'm going to go to Chris. As you referenced, getting consistent, accurate, efficient, cost-effective embodied carbon measurement can be very challenging. So taking concrete batch plants and their myriad unique design mixes as an example, what's the time and cost impact to creating EPDs online in real time via the tools that you're providing, for instance?
Okay, that's a long question. I'll start by saying that the basic structure of the system I think is really sound, but there's plenty of problems to be fixed. And I'd also say that it starts with policy. New York State is going to require, in concrete, but other materials as well, a hard number that has to be met, a hard GWP number for multiple strengths of concrete mixes starting in January of next year. That is a hard purchase metric, and that motivates everything. That's a major motivator for improving the quality and integrity of the whole process. One of the questions was, what is the process? Well, it's two steps. So our customers, those 1,000 plants or so, can either sign into their own corporate software system or sign into our system directly and enter a product design. In this case, it's a mixed design, and generate an EPD in seconds that's fully verified. However, the setup process, as I call it, which is the life cycle assessment and setup process that occurs before that, is much more complex. And that is where the care needs to take place. It's a process where we have to know every single supplier for every one of those 1,000 plants. We need to know their distance of where their material suppliers are located, how that material gets to the plant, the energy consumption of the plant, and all of that has to be factored in and then verified by a third-party verifier. Once that process is complete, which we'll talk about later, I think some of the holes in it, then the customer can generate an EPD in minutes, not months, as I like to say, and begin to innovate rapidly. That's also the other piece of this is how fast can I innovate? How fast can I improve my products? How fast can I improve my steel process or my glass process or my concrete block process? And we're really excited. So I said, setting a hard number motivates a commercial world like we live in the United States very intensely, because suddenly it's a competitive factor. The other thing is things like the Inflation Reduction Act, which now across the nation will require EPDs for any GSA project, and we're already seeing many commercial organizations, some of them led, like Amazon.com. Every time Amazon builds a warehouse or a data center, they require reduced carbon concrete. And this has to move into other materials. It has to move to doors and windows and paints and everything else. We chose to start with concrete because it's 8% of global warming, and we believe we can have a substantial impact by giving them the tools they need. Hopefully that answers the question. I think
Yeah, it does. I guess just one more follow-on question, Chris. How can that lead to innovation, in the industry for concrete and for other materials?
How does it lead to innovation? Concrete producers are like everybody else, and all of a sudden, they've been measured on strength, workability, and durability of their concrete mix designs forever. And suddenly, the engineers that sit in those companies have a new purchase metric. They have to, the building has to stand up, the bridge has to stand up, they have to meet their strength requirements. But now they're going to be rewarded by how they can do that at the lowest possible carbon impact, the lowest possible GWP. It becomes a framing, it frames everything that they do. And it's a transformation for them, but it's every single major concrete company and many of the regionals now are investing in carbon sequestration and new cements, new materials, aggregate optimization. So if you have more rock with less space between them, you can use less cement, which means less carbon. Just the innovation pace is unbelievable now. Very often we'll see 3 or 4 versions of a single EPD for a single mix, and every one meets the same constructability requirements, workability, durability, and strength at a lower carbon footprint. It's just really astounding how a financial motivation and a number in front of you can generate in seconds makes a huge difference in your ability to innovate.
And sorry, just one more follow-on question, because I'm seeing a question from the audience for a definition of an EPD, and you're probably best suited on this panel to define an environmental product declaration. What's in it?
There's a little bit of an echo. What is an EPD? Okay, I'm so sorry. What is he talking about? EP what? Okay. An EPD is, there's multiple types, but we're talking about what are called type 3 product-specific EPDs. Sometimes they're called plant-specific. And that means they're verified and they're down, they measure roughly 21 environmental impacts of a product or a process. And it's essentially a report that says, okay, we've measured this product, it's been verified, these measurements, and you can look at this report and see all of the environmental impacts, including the water consumption, the eutrophication, and all these other impact areas. However, the one that everybody's looking at now is GWP, which is the global warming potential or carbon equivalents. California, we're looking at water now and then, but every place else, it's just GWP.
Great, thanks, Chris. So maybe zooming out a little bit more, I'm going to go to Tess. There's been a whole lot of momentum around office to resi conversions, given high office vacancies and insufficient housing. What exactly does this have to do with embodied carbon and maybe the context of whole life carbon?
Sure. So what does it have to do with embodied carbon? So essentially, if you're considering a conversion, you're reusing an existing building that's already built, an office building that currently is sitting, 40, 50, sometimes 60% vacant, if not more. And you're reusing that building to fill New York's insatiable need for housing, specifically affordable housing. So from a carbon perspective, we can consider that to be an offset below a baseline of new construction, right? Residential buildings go up in the city seemingly every day. And if we could fulfill the unit demand with an existing building rather than from building up from the ground up, we can save embodied carbon in the process just by reusing the building. It's a little more complicated than that in terms of a conversion because there are, significant structural changes that sometimes need to be made. We have to replace windows in many cases because in office buildings they're not operable. Sometimes you need to carve into the mass of the building to get sufficient light and air into units. But our study found that just by doing the conversion, you can save 60% on average embodied carbon below a baseline of new construction. And what's really exciting to me about this type of conversion is the whole life carbon perspective. So in addition to saving that embodied carbon, you're also saving operational carbon because you're retrofitting these buildings in the process. And if you sort of take like a mental walk down Midtown, these buildings are built 60s, 70s, and the 80s. They're curtain wall construction. They've not been typically maintained very well. At this point, the curtain walls are leaky. The sealants have shrunk. They're have oversized HVAC systems. They're running on gas, if not oil. So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit if you think about decarbonizing an existing office building. That office owners right now are not about to put in the money to retrofit those buildings when they're already operating at a deficit, typically. So opening up the potential to convert to residential means that they're able to potentially see some payback from those retrofits. And these are the type of retrofits that would just naturally follow a conversion where you're typically gutting the entire building and replacing all of the systems anyway. So our research found that if you did a conversion tomorrow, you would be operating at 34% on average less carbon intensity than you did the day before, so significant savings. And what's really exciting is if you put those two things together, we found that you would save about 54% whole life carbon below a baseline condition by 2050. Obviously, I'm presenting this as if it's like a brilliant solution that works perfectly. It's a little more complicated than that. And the first kicker is that it's currently not feasible under New York City zoning to convert a lot of these buildings. So there's FAR caps and age limits on buildings that can be converted that currently have prevented this from taking off. The financial district, for various reasons, has different zoning limitations, and you do see mid-century conversions happening there, which is really exciting. So the first thing the city needs to do is to lift some of these zoning restrictions, and some of it does actually happen at a state level in terms of the age of assets that can be converted. And I think the second thing is, it's really expensive to convert a building. In many cases, more expensive than building new from the ground up. It takes care and attention to understand existing conditions. And so I think it would be really exciting if city, state, even federal government started to sort of put a finger on the scale, so to speak, and offer some incentives for conversions, especially given just how much it makes sense from a carbon perspective. And the report that we put out, we sort of are using to lobby city council to consider some of the zoning changes that are required. And some of them are in the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity that's going before the council by the end of the year. So everyone keep your eyes peeled.
Awesome. Thank you, Tess. That's super helpful. And then Diana, maybe kind of zooming even further out to the targets that organizations set. So how do you set a really aggressive but actually truly achievable target that's rooted in science? How do you guys aid various types of entities that you guys are working with, specifically in the building industry, to reduce scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions?
Yeah, so it's a very fine balance, and one that I think we hear from both sides we're not getting exactly right for their side. So it is, it's a constant tightrope you walk on, as any multi-stakeholder organization would walk on, between a private sector and the scientific community and the environmental NGO community. But what's really important is that we're trying to drive the most ambitious reductions possible. And that is the most important thing to us. It's more important than having a 100% guaranteed path to achieve that target. It's more important to set it, to encourage your value chain partners to set it. And we believe that doing that, getting your value chain aligned, a science-based decarbonization will get us much closer to achieving our goals than if everyone continues setting non-standardized targets that are mainly influenced by other priorities, non-scientific basis, and especially cost incentives. I mean, what a science-based target is intended to do is to help build another incentive that can counter that cost incentive, for example. So how do we build in an incentive to help that sustainability team make that argument within a company that they need to consider retrofitting instead of buying a new building? And having that be a public target, having that be something that investors are asking about and asking for you to report your progress against and your plans to achieve that target is a counterbalance and counterweight to just pure cost considerations. And a lot of companies, might be implementing a carbon price internally to help implement their target and achieve their target. So that just becomes part of the calculation you're doing to determine investments and your CapEx. So it's really just kind of trying to counterbalance that, I would say. The last thing I'll mention is that we have also the way we try to increase the feasibility is through engaging all the stakeholders in a value chain. So we've addressed several of them today in our buildings project. That's not public yet. It will be published in the coming months. It's going through approval processes. That's for developers, owner-occupiers, owner-lessors, property managers, and financial institutions. And the second phase of that project will address architects, designers, engineers, and construction. And on top of that, we have your upstream emissions. We have guidance for cement and steel so that they can help you align to a science-based decarbonization by knowing what they need to do to contribute to that. So we're hoping really to build that value chain working towards a common goal that is science-based, and we think that's the best chance we'll have to achieve our goals.
Fantastic. Thanks, Diana. So I'm going to take a few questions from the audience now. I'm going to stick with you, Diana, for a second here. And this question pertains a bit to boundaries. And this question's asking, should buildings include all the carbon generated in training the models and operating the servers as embodied carbon in the building? And so I guess it's a question about boundaries of what should be counted as embodied carbon for the purposes of, there's sort of the product level, there's the building level, and then there's the organization level, potentially, if you're talking about a real estate company. Do you guys provide, can you say maybe how you provide that guidance on what's in and what's outside those boundaries for what should be included in embodied carbon counting?
Yeah, and actually, when it comes to greenhouse gas accounting, we are aligning typically with other standards, like the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. For embodied emissions, we're aligning with the European standard modules. Right now, we're covering A1 through A5. So that is, the construction materials, the transportation of those, and the actual construction of the building. It's not the in-use embodied emissions that would come from maintenance, repairs, et cetera, or the end-of-life stages. Primarily right now, to get back to a point I think we'll keep raising on this panel, that the guidance was constrained by the robustness and granularity of the data that's available. So we do intend to build on that work to expand to the other modules of embodied carbon, but right now it's just the upfront embodied emissions. And for those purposes too, that means we're only really having companies set targets on newly constructed buildings, which also that just by default incentivizes retrofits, but that's where things stand right now for the upfront embodied emissions. I don't know if my co-panelists have something to add.
Did you want to go ahead?
Can I add something?
Absolutely.
Okay. One thing I did not realize that SBTI was working now on construction. And I think this is a really kind of a game changer, because what we do with environmental product declarations, these are little building blocks, right? One product here, one product there. And then the next level up, most of you as architects are probably familiar with whole building LCA. You're trying to do estimates in the design stage and there's no good tools around, and maybe use one-click or the former Thornton Tomasetti tool, now owned by EC3. But this is creating a set of building blocks that can build all the way up to the very top of the corporation, and SBTI requires that the CEO and the top people in the organization make these commitments. And so I think this is a potential real game changer if we can move this along more quickly, going from EPDs, which are great at the micro level. We measure all the way back to the supply chain. All you have to do is know how much of that stuff you sell, and you've got a great Scope 3 report. So that was just a comment, really, that it's really nice to see these different initiatives coming together in more of a holistic and strategic view of carbon reduction and decarbonization.
Could I add just one more thing that I forgot to mention? So I thank you. I think it's really important to also add that these types of gatherings and these kind of sector-specific collaboration spaces are also a great place to, I think, align in areas where we might not have that guidance yet. So I know that we don't provide, we don't get down to the granular, you have to use this emissions factor to do this calculation. But that's something that I think is where industry can collaborate and decide what the best metrics are. And so we have some emissions accounting guidance in our draft of the buildings guidance is available on our website. You can look at the draft version today to see what the emissions guidance is that we currently include, but it does have a limit, and we don't get down to the super granular level, except I think we could talk about that for the next round of the buildings project.
Great. Maybe I'm going to give this one to you, Tess. What's the status of allowing modern timber construction in New York City? The status of allowing modern timber construction in New York City, and maybe what are the embodied carbon impacts of that?
Yeah, I think it comes down to the fire code. I'm sure we have some structural engineers at Arup that could answer this question better than I can. There are height restrictions currently. I think timber's a great solution for embodied carbon. You're reducing the footprint of your main structural system, which in many cases is 50%, if not more, of the embodied carbon of your building. There are a lot of nuances to the way you count carbon for timber. If you're allowing to count for the sequestration of carbon, that's what really will reduce your calculated footprint. But so much depends on how that timber is grown and the type of forest it comes from to actually get effective sequestration, which, given the state of the industry, can't necessarily be guaranteed. So, I don't like to sort of tear people down when they want to build a wood building, but there are things to consider as well. It's not necessarily sort of a hole in one.
Mm-hmm.
Can I comment on that too?
Absolutely.
I think wood buildings are an amazing and critical, don't shoot me if I say this, short-term solution, because there's only so much timber in the world, and we need those trees. And so I think there's a crossover point where people in the industry I work with a lot, the concrete industry, they're going to get to zero. We're going to make zero carbon cement or concrete. And so I think we have to be just really careful. There's so many mega issues around climate change. We need to build a bunch of 8-story buildings right now out of wood because it's but I see it really as a crossover strategy, not a long-term strategy, when I think the number is we're building in the world something like 30-some New York cities every month or some weird, massive number like that. And there's just not enough trees in Canada to support that.
And so I guess in talking about these different materials, Mariane, there's we've been talking about concrete a lot, timber, metal. What about retrofit materials, more of the kind of interior finished materials? Is that something that New York State's looking at regulating at any point, given that there is a lot of retrofitting of a lot of especially office buildings, but a lot of building types, and maybe it's a little bit more complicated to measure, but just kind of curious, this is another question that's come in.
Yes. Yeah, that is a good question. Actually, at the very beginning, when we started to compile the list of covered materials, we had included insulation as one of them. But as we sort of looked into it, we realized that, yeah, it's it's sort of more complicated to figure out, there's less sort of these environmental product declaration reports available, and this is something that we're very heavily relying on in order to make this policy, in order to roll this policy out in a way across all our, standardized way across all our agencies. So we did look at it. It is complicated. We do want to look at it because we certainly see a huge opportunity given, as you mentioned, the number of retrofits. Also, there are some really great bio-based alternatives out there for insulation material, which we're very excited to hear about. We don't know a ton about them. I don't personally know a ton, but I'm very excited to hear that they're out there, and I'd really like to sort of get them pushed, push for their use across the state. But yeah, I think it'll be at a future state when we maybe expand the list of covered materials that we have.
Mm-hmm. Great, and then I guess maybe I'll just ask a follow-on question to that. This is really specific to global warming potential numbers, but someone's asking if the global warming potential thresholds that have been set, are they different for upstate versus New York City?
Oh, that's a good question. So they are not. They are our starting point. So if you go to our Buy Clean Concrete guidelines, and it's available on the OGS website, you can see the table that the panelist was asking about. We basically set a table by compressive strength of concrete based on something, there's an association called the National Ready Mix Concrete Association, and they are obviously a national association, and they create they do a life cycle analysis of report every year, or most years, on the state of the concrete industry and the different concrete mixes across the country. And so they'll create like a number for a national average, and they'll also split, I think they divide the country up into 12 different regions, and they create an average for each region. And so the approach that many states, including ours, have taken, because we don't have our own good data, is we took the National Ready Mix Association's average for our region, so we're the eastern region. We took that average of all the kind of compressive strength mixes, and we gave it a factor of 150%. So, and then that has become our standard, and that's the standard. That's a pretty typical approach, I'd say, that most states across the U.S. have taken. And the reason we did that was because embodied carbon is fairly new, right, for most of us, and definitely for state staff. And I think for, I'd say still many concrete producers, it's still, fairly new having to create an EPD, especially the smaller producers that are upstate or in more rural regions. So we really wanted to we wanted to put in place a requirement that you have to submit an EPD by January next year, and that the EPD has to show that your concrete mix's GWP falls under our limit. And what we wanted to do is create sort of an achievable limit for today, because we realize not all the producers are going to be able to crank out low carbon concrete tomorrow. So you got to figure out who's in your supply chain. You've got to figure out the other materials you'll use instead of Portland cement, which is sort of the most carbon intensive ingredient. So we wanted to kind of give time for the market to innovate. So what we're doing is sort of collecting data for the next few years, and then in 2027 we'll lower the limits in that table based on the data we've collected on our own concrete that we've procured on our own. And at that point, we hope that will give everyone enough time to figure out low carbon concrete.
Great. And Tess, where is the best place to start integrating embodied carbon into design and construction projects for risk-averse organizations?
Interesting, risk-averse. I mean, the answer is from the very beginning. I think it's something, as construction progresses, it becomes harder and harder to change some of the fundamental decisions that you made at the beginning of a construction project, like are you using steel or timber? And so that's one way to mitigate risk, that if you have these conversations at the very beginning, you don't risk having to blow up your entire design and start it from scratch when you're about to start construction documents. So yeah, I also think there's so much still like education that needs to happen for a typical person in the industry that's not as clued in as everyone here. And I like to have those conversations at the very, very beginning of a project so that you can bring whole teams along and get them excited about the potential carbon reductions in the project from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm. Great. And Chris, how can we leverage AI to better develop embodied carbon metrics of products? Bringing it back to the first panel.
Could you repeat that again? There's a
Oh,
little bit of
sure,
an echo
yeah.
up here, and
How can we leverage AI to
okay.
develop better embodied carbon metrics of products?
I probably should have mentioned AI. Or, these days, if you're a software person, if you don't talk about AI, they must think you don't know what's going on. I think AI has enormous potential across, and also, when I talk about concrete, I think it's a general example for every building material. But we can do, concrete producers, we're already partnering with a company called AIcrete, who is building a system to make concrete mix designs using AI as a starting point. So that's a starting point. I think it's going to be more useful in things like optimizing the details. So when I think ahead, all the concrete producers are going to know how to design concrete mixes with what are called supplementary cementitious material, fly ash and slag, and these things, and reduce carbon. There's a massive effort, hundreds of millions of dollars going into zero carbon cement. Some of our customers like Sublime Materials. This brilliant young woman is PhD out of MIT, making cement with electricity. So when companies know how to make cheap cement or make low carbon cement, cheap in my world of carbon, there's going to be details like using AI to optimize your transport and your supply chain, using AI to optimize your mix of aggregates, the rock that goes. Rock is harder than cement when it hardens. I mean, the rocks they stick in there are harder than the cement when it hardens. So if you can get lots of rock and no space, as I mentioned before, you can optimize for carbon and for strength. And AI is going to be great at those kinds of more micro design levels. And I think that fits in with what the first panel was talking about. What's your learning base? And we have 100 and counting versions 1, 2, 3. We've got 150,000 mixed designs in our database. I think we'll be able to start looking at mixed designs at a micro level and letting AI do that work, because AI is great where humans aren't. AI is great when you have so much data, it's overwhelming. AI loves it. That's where they thrive.
Great. And can I ask, can we have 5 more minutes, or do we need to wrap up? 2. Okay, that's good compromise. So I get greedy. I'm going to ask each of the panelists, actually, in this last 2 minutes, kind of a flash round here, just to state, maybe something that's needed that doesn't currently exist to dramatically cut embodied carbon, or what steps the audience can take to expedite real progress around measuring and reducing embodied carbon. You can answer either of those questions. I'll start with Mariane.
Yeah, I think one of the key things, and this obviously from a public sector perspective, and I wonder if the public sector audience members would agree, is one of the things that we certainly need to change our own contracting and specifications so that we allow for these alternative materials to be used at government level. So we're starting to embark on this policy to reduce it, but not all of our agencies, contract mechanisms and specifications allow for it. So that's something that we're also trying to adopt. But our DOT is doing it, just in case.
Okay, great. Diana?
I would just say incentives. I think everything is an incentives game. I really think we need more incentives for retrofits. I know in the IEA's net zero scenario, the pace of retrofits of existing buildings needs to more than double over the decade. So I'm delighted to hear Tess is training the next generation, but we need more incentives to balance out on that cost problem.
Great. Chris?
What I mentioned before, which is we live in a capitalist society, and making carbon a hard purchase metric will stimulate almost everything. And that's easier than changing our economic system. In EPDs themselves, I'm hopeful that the EPA and the Inflation Reduction Act will make verification radically more rigorous. I think about CPAs, and it takes 3 days to become a CPA to pass the test, and most of them fail the first time. To be a carbon verifier, an EPD verifier, you just have to say, I know LCA, I'll go verify. It's not adequate when millions and millions of dollars are going to be at stake.
Agreed. Tess?
Yeah, I think incentives for reuse would be amazing. You know, the work these guys are doing at such a granular level on LCAs and on estimating the amount of carbon in specific materials is great, but it's really wonky, and it gets really detailed to the level of space between the rocks and the concrete very quickly. Whereas reuse, you know, it's we're talking about big items, the foundations, the steel structure. So incentives for reusing those big ticket items, I think, is a little more efficient, more effective potentially in terms of policy, and a little more easily understandable.
Fantastic. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you to our speakers. I'm going to have you take a quick picture over here, and then you can exit our stage right over there by the sign. And thank you to all of our speakers from today. We just have a quick couple of announcements before we move into our closing remarks. First, there is a QR code to a short survey in your program. If you can fill that out for us as soon as possible, we really value your feedback, and we'll use it, you know, for the next conference and our future programming. Next, we will also email a link out to this recording to everyone who registered, and we'll be posting it on our website as well, so stay tuned for that. And then last, for anyone who's pursuing continuing education units, we will send an email out with a certificate of completion within the week, and that will confirm 3.5 CEUs. So if you're an AIA member and you submitted your AIA number to us, either at registration or through email, we will report those credits on your behalf. If you are pursuing GBCI or PDH, or you just need a certificate to report to the state, you can also use that certificate to self-report those credits. Okay, so we're gonna have some closing remarks. I'd like to call up Sarah Kendall, Urban Green's incoming board chair and the vice president and general manager of Turner Construction.
All right. Wow. What a conference. My name is Sarah Kendall from Turner, and I'm the incoming board chair for Urban Green. I'm grateful you joined us this afternoon. Thank you for being here with us today and supporting Urban Green in our mission. Before we close today, I would like to recognize our outgoing board chair, Sabrina Canner. And Sabrina, if you could join me on the stage. Oh yes, we're gonna do this. Since 2022, Sabrina has led our board with the strongest of dedication, always available. She is always supportive, always insightful, and always moving us forward. Her long, distinguished career at Brookfield brought a practical perspective that made every board discussion more dimensional and every board decision more grounded. She has a knack for seeing through the gray areas to find clarity with a steady, supportive, guiding hand, and it allowed Urban Green to flourish in the most uncertain of times. So on behalf of the board and on behalf of a very grateful staff, please join me in a round of applause to thank Sabrina for all of her efforts.
Thank you. You know, I believe that the great work and mission of Urban Green, the education, the policy support, the convening, discussion leadership, thought leadership, this work is so critically important. It's so urgently needed, and it is actually so fascinating. So it's been my pleasure, my honor, my privilege to work with you, John, to work with the dedicated, hardworking, and talented Urban Green staff, as well as our incredible board. I have every confidence that Impact and Reach will continue to grow under Sarah's stewardship. And thank you. I'll be staying close to the hoop. So
Great. Thank you. All right. Well, we've come to the end. I have a really fun announcement to make. As I keep track of this, I drive my team nuts. So we've been doing a conference like this for 14 years, and we set yet another record with 350 people exactly in the room. So thank you for joining us. Let's give everybody here a big round of applause for that. I want to thank Sabrina for her leadership and Sarah for stepping up, and look forward to working with you, and you'll get to know her over the course of the years. I'm grateful to all the speakers today and all the moderators who really brought home the topics that we were trying to deliver today. To continue the conversation, I invite you to our summer member reception, which is just in a couple weeks on June 21st. At the beautiful rooftop gardens of Cook Fox Architects. Right up there, you can see that. So hope you can join us there. And I also want to give a shout out to our gala on October 1st. If you want to continue to support our work and allow us to do the type of work that we do, I want to invite you to the best sustainability celebration and party on the planet, right? Maybe Rhiannon has a different one, but at least the best one here in New York, which is our gala. And this year we're really, really honored to honor as our honoree, Gina McCarthy will be our honoree. She was President Biden's first White House climate advisor and has been the architect of most of our domestic climate policy in the United States. Prior to that, she was the EPA administrator for President Obama. So join us to meet and celebrate all the work that Gina has done. Finally, again, a shout out to our sponsors, to Carrier for being our lead sponsor today and helping to make sure that this conference was the big success that it was. Thank you to NYU, our host, for having us in this tremendous space. And we're about to lead into a reception that's only possible because of two organizations that stepped up to the plate that we really appreciate. First is ICER, which is our lead reception sponsor. And then secondly, our supporting reception sponsor is Local 94 Building Operating Engineer. So let's give all of them a big round of applause. So that's it. Join us for a snack and some drink across the hallway. Thank you.